Ngā mihi and welcome to Tower Sector Report. In the first of a two-part special on the future of irrigation, correspondent Drew Chappell takes a look at the government's recent water policy changes and what they mean for farming, tourism and fishing. Drew speaks to several interest groups about how the funding announcements and council guidelines will shape the future of our most precious commodity. Regional councils, irrigation lobbyists, ecological scientists and farming groups all have an interest in the water debate, and pleasing everyone will not be easy. So what's the government doing about our water use? I quiz Agriculture Minister David Carter about Wellington's contribution. It'll be big, and it needs to be. He says the government will invest up to $400 million in various schemes. And later in the program, we catch up with the plight of another precious resource, our bees. But first, Drew Chappell with his special report from Canterbury.
New Zealand is a land of water. We're certainly not short of it. On average, nearly 2 metres of rain and snow falls annually, most of that flowing through our rivers and streams, into lakes or out to sea. But it's what happens to that fresh water on the way there that has been a bone of contention and litigation since the Resource Management Act was introduced in 1991. The government recognised the need for change in 2009 when it commissioned a board of inquiry, supported by a Land and Water Forum, to find a better way to manage the water so vital for our economy and our international image. The Forum and the Board of Inquiry agreed to a set of objectives, outlining a new direction for the country's fresh water. It recommended a national policy statement be released in order to guide both regional councils and businesses in water-intensive industries. But the government went a step further, releasing the NPS in May this year, alongside new funding for the development of nationwide irrigation and the cleaning up of polluted waterways. The responses to the announcement were mixed.
To be honest, it's a no-brainer. I mean, just look at what's happening globally. I mean, the food security thing is out there. Everyone's aware of it internationally. That's why you've got Chinese and other overseas people looking at what's happening in New Zealand, and New Zealand's lucky. It's got an ample water supply. It's just about how we get smarter and how we use it better.
New Zealand's lakes, rivers and waterways are currently in the middle of a three-way tug of war between urban, environmental and agricultural interests. That's why developing legislation around the storage and use of water like this, the Hutt River behind me, is such a complex issue. With so many different interest groups, it's a marvel that the Forum came up with any sort of agreement at all. But they did, recommending more than 50 changes to the current system. Fish and Game CEO Bryce Johnson is a part of the Land and Water Forum, but is upset by what he says is a watered-down version of the original NPS recommendations.
It's disappointing from the Forum's point of view because they largely supported the Board of Inquiry NPS that was developed by David Shepherd, retired Environment Court judge and others. And as I say, the Forum largely supported that, but the government have made, I think, something like 20 odd changes to it. And of course it begs the question, from where did the government draw the mandate to take that position when all of the major players, of course, were sitting around the Land and Water Forum table. So that's why I think the Forum is looking a little bit sideways at just how committed the government is to the actual Forum process.
Environmental groups, along with several iwi, have criticised the vague language used in the NPS, which speaks of targets for overall water quality, and in all contains more than 20 changes from the original document.
The initial proposed one by Judge Shepherd basically put the environment first. This one talks about saying we'll have overall water quality at a regional level, which implies that a number of rivers that are currently in a degraded state could stay that way, and of course they then protect the already well protected or iconic ones. And so what we run the risk of getting is more degradation of the lowland streams, which is the ones of course that need repatriation straight away.
The explosion in intensive crop and stock farming right across the country, but in particular the South Island, has been in conjunction with the increased availability of fresh, clean water. Agriculture Minister David Carter has often repeated his desire to see all farms improved by the opportunity to source fresh water, no matter where in the country they are. Speaking at this year's Field Days in Hamilton, the Minister personally endorsed the goals set out by the national government related to irrigation funding, which could mean potentially more than $400 million to the industry.
From a personal perspective, I was very pleased to finally get recognition of the need for government to be more significantly involved in the development of irrigation. So we announced a $35 million package called the Acceleration Fund. That's a 5-year spend, and I want that money spent. I want schemes right around New Zealand to partner with government and develop schemes more professionally than we've done in the past, into a scheme whereby we can go out and find investors prepared to be part of the funding.
Horticulture New Zealand CEO Peter Silcock says the water announcements represent the end of an unhealthy era of fighting between growers and regional councils, something which has cost millions of dollars over the past 2 decades.
We just believe there's got to be a better way, and the Land and Water Forum and the NPS is really starting out to get a better way where we have an agreed position nationally which we can push forward rather than having these debates over and over within the regions. We definitely need to consider those regional differences that there are, but within that national framework, and we feel that that's going to, it's going to move the focus, it's going to, I guess, get us away from this winners and losers and into a situation where, we can have a win-win.
Some groups suggest as a result of the funding, we could see as many as 1 million extra dairy cows in the Canterbury region alone, something which has environmentalists up in arms. Bryce Johnson says the specific targets around water quality put forward by the original Land and Water Forum would have meant a safe, balanced expansion of irrigation and water storage could take place.
The forum process is unique. It hasn't happened in New Zealand before. It's a concept that came out of Scandinavia, where governments over there have largely said, look, you competing interests, you go and sort out the solutions, and we, the government, will largely implement them. What's happened in New Zealand, the government have set up the forum, but they've retained all the decision making on the outcomes to themselves, which begs the question who they're representing when they take a different view, when all the players are sitting around the table.
He says the government has missed an opportunity to define objectively what constitutes clean water.
The sort of goal that we on the environmental and I think iwi side are saying is that we want to see rivers safe for swimming, fishing and food gathering. That's a fundamental goal that we've got, and that ought to be the objective of the NPS, so that all regional councils have a very clear steer on what they're meant to be trying to do. The NPS that we've now got doesn't give that sort of firm direction to regional councils. So we'll be left with 16 or so regional councils, all fumbling around trying to get their policies in place that allow for multiple use, and very much the balancing exercise where no one's defining what the balance should be.
But Andrew Curtis rejects that suggestion, saying the criteria for irrigators seeking government funding under the assistance scheme are watertight.
The Irrigation Acceleration Fund, which is the $35 million fund, the criteria are being developed at the present moment in time, but they're going to be tough criteria. It's not going to be a handout for irrigators. There's going to be both economic viability and environmental viability involved, and there's also going to be community collaboration is going to be part of it. So I think when people meet those criteria, then we're going to be assured that there's going to be a win for everybody.
Next week we travel down to South Canterbury to look at an operation that has managed to keep farmers, environmental groups and recreational lakegoers happy, the Opua Dam.
Drew Chappell there. Next up, I talked to Agriculture Minister David Carter on his government's plans for our water storage and distribution. From what he says, the government's taking the issue very seriously and is prepared to throw large amounts of money at it. Well, Minister, welcome again to the Sector Report program here on Country 99 TV.
Thank you, John.
And taking the time out to talk to us here at Field Days, which explains a little bit of the noise in the background.
Great opportunity though. It's just wonderful to be here.
Now, water. The Land Water Forum has recommended 53 changes or recommendations to existing legislation, but the government's only going to act on 3. What are those 3 areas?
Well, first of all, the Land and Water Forum's done a superb job, and it was a group representing 58 stakeholders with an interest in water. We asked them to go away, spend about a year coming up with some decisions, and that report came to us a couple of months ago. It's not a government report, so we won't necessarily act on all 53 recommendations. What they did say is that we needed a national policy statement, and we needed that with urgency.
Right.
So as part of the budget announcement during May, we've made that announcement. We have delivered a national policy statement on water, both quantity and quality. That'll give very strong direction now to regional councils as to where their responsibility lies. We're going to take more time to work through the other recommendations, and we'll be coming back with suggestions later on. That work may well take the rest of this year and some of next year.
Right. So quite a bit of policy and power will reside with the local authorities, will it, rather than coming out of Wellington?
Well, I think the direction now has very firmly needs to come from central government,
right.
And we've made those signals. In amongst the budgets, besides the national policy statement, was a very strong measure of financial support. We announced the Irrigation Acceleration Fund,
yep.
$35 million, so that we can get schemes underway, get the pre-feasibility work done, get the feasibility work done, and then beyond that we're indicating up to $400 million for which government will invest in some of those major schemes. This government wants economic growth. The best way we can achieve that within agriculture is to deliver more reliable water, but it won't be about irrigation at all cost, and that's the good work of the Land and Water Forum. We have to respect the environmental concerns, the recreational concerns, and it's about trying to get all those concerns, understanding each other, and then delivering real solutions that meet everyone's expectation.
There does seem to be some criticism floating around, though, that you want to phase in these developments and our whole handling of the water question over a number of years. But anybody, you know, a lot of people seem to be saying they want immediate and radical action because of the perception, if not the reality, about the state of our waterways. Aren't you going to be accused of dragging the chain a bit?
Well, I think it's important to get it right. You know, governments for generations have talked about this. They were talking about irrigating the Canterbury Plains in the early 1900s. We're 100 years on and it hasn't been achieved. I'm as impatient as anybody. But if we think it's going to be irrigation and to hell with the other aspects of it, then we won't make the progress. So I think it is a matter of being patient. I'm very, very keen to see it happen. It is a personal ambition of mine, but we do have to do it in such a way that we respect the fact that irrigation will lead to more intensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture potentially leads to more environmental degradation and a declining water quality, and that is an unsatisfactory outcome. So we will need time, but if we take time and do it right, we'll get a result that I think will deliver benefit to the New Zealand economy for hundreds of years.
Well, talking about getting it right, I mean, what do you expect to be seeing happening? And Canterbury really is the place that we're talking about, isn't it? And to a certain extent, Southland. To the layman, it looks like irrigators are placing far more demand on aquifers and rivers than they can cope with. What do you say to that perception? And it is a perception.
Well, no, I think in some cases it's actually true. I think the former Regional Council, Environment Canterbury, has in many places over-allocated. We're now sucking aquifers dry. We're causing the lowland streams' quantity of water to decline to the extent we have major quality issues in some of those lowland streams. If we can develop an encompassing water storage program, I believe we can give more satisfactory used water that's stored at times of very peak flows. We can then use some of that irrigation water to replace what we're currently taking from aquifers. If we do it right, we can deliver a win-win-win situation to everybody concerned.
The trick, though, is to find somewhere to store that water. I mean, there was a scheme, which I reported on a year or two ago, with Brian Deans out at Colgate, and yes, we were sitting there about 300 metres under where the water level was going to be. Fortunately, that got scotched, that scheme in the end. But you are putting farmland at risk, aren't you? Or productive land.
Potentially, there is a very large natural reservoir now called Lake Coleridge. It's a very substantial piece of waterway. There is potential to use that. It will require some changes to a water conservation order. It will require working very closely with Trustpower, who generate electricity from that lake at the moment. But there's one solution that I think we can talk about in a way that's satisfactory to the environmentalists. We do need water storage, and I don't think we should run away from that. But there are other potential sites that are being investigated as we speak. One of them is a very substantial dam and the flooding of Lees Valley. It's not a particularly easy farming. That is in Canterbury. It's not a particularly easy farming environment, and I think maybe that is a solution that it will require a lot of investment if it was to proceed, but we're light years away from saying that that is the one that's going to fix the plumbing for Canterbury.
I guess also you're going to have to take into account the NIMBY principle, not in my backyard, which will possibly come into play with some suggested areas where...
If you're going to build a dam and flood farmland, then there is a thing called a property right, and you must treat those people with absolute respect. You've got to take them with them, and if it involves them actually losing part of their farm or all of their farm, I believe you need to very handsomely compensate those people so that they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Look, thanks very much for your time here at Field Days today.
It's always a pleasure.
I think you've got another appointment to go and see a delegation, so we'll let you go. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
Welcome back. Next up, we turn our attention to another vital resource under threat, our bees, worth $5.1 billion annually to our economy. Maureen Maxwell, a leading light in our bee industry and an executive member of the Beekeepers Association, took time out from a busy beekeepers conference to join me in the studio. Maureen, welcome back to Tower Sector Report here on Country 99. Now, it seems that bees and humans have enjoyed a mutually beneficial relationship literally for millennia, but in recent years that's come to a grinding halt. You're very concerned about colony losses around the world, and that's certainly been a strong theme through your conference. Would this be the biggest concern for apiarists?
We have many concerns. Certainly biosecurity is a huge concern to us in New Zealand. We are a bit of a paradise out here. We have Varroa, which has been devastating, of course, but there are other potential threats that we don't wish to have here. It's very important to keep our point of difference in the global marketplace, and of course we're watching this colony loss with huge interest. We're trying to study...
What the Americans call colony collapse, don't they?
Yes, they've sort of, colony collapse.
And it's a particular problem for them?
It is a very big problem, but of course they mechanised their agriculture, horticulture, and their beekeeping practices to such a huge degree, and we're looking and realising that there are big problems there. At the end of the day, we're working with nature and we've got to be working with it, not against it. So we must learn from these lessons. There are a number of factors that are coming about because of the colony losses, but certainly the lack of biodiversity is one of them. Bee nutrition, so that's why we're rolling out and really encouraging people for bee-friendly planting. Pesticides, of course, are a huge issue, as is the fertilisers, even things like centre pivots that with all the
I want to get onto
change
all
of
those
diversity.
Those different threats. They seem to be coming from everywhere.
The reality is the bees can't live without us, and we can't live without the bees.
Indeed.
So we have to work together on this.
So what are the factors in different countries? You say it sort of varies by region around the globe that are actually causing these colonies to disappear?
Well, it does vary a little bit, but a lot of these problems are, of course, man-made. And we have to learn from that. Things that seemed like a wonderful idea, coated seeds, and, potential benefits to one sector, but they haven't thought strategically about what else is going to be affected there. And people will look out, they'll see wonderful fields of clover and think, ideal for the bees.
Absolutely.
But the systemic pesticide is actually coming through the plant, and the bees are foraging, but they're getting poisoned. Right. And that cocktail of, although a lot of the scientific data is coming through and showing that sublethal effects of just tiny amounts of one pesticide, when you get that combination of 2 or 3 different things, a fungicide here, a pesticide there, a fertiliser, the cocktail is becoming lethal.
Yeah, indeed. Just if we look at New Zealand and this colony loss, how does our rate of colony loss compare to, say, Europe or North America?
North America has, I think, the large commercial beekeepers have in fact experienced the biggest losses. But then you're talking about dump sites of, 10,000 hives that they're dumping in a desert with nothing. Nothing within 5 kilometres for them to eat. All these huge green deserts, as we call them, where the fences have been taken out, all the hedgerows have gone, there's no balanced nutrition. The reality is bees, like humans, if they only have one food source, they soon get sick. They need to be healthy, just like people, just like humans, and have clean water supplies. So if you've got contaminated water supplies, for instance, that's also going to affect the bees. So we need to learn from this, and we are starting to experience in high intensive areas like perhaps around Gisborne and Canterbury, there are beekeepers reporting 30 to 40% colony loss wintering over. Now if a dairy farmer was losing 40% of his cows every winter, there would be a big problem here. People don't seem to realise that the little bees are also hugely important, and we can't sustain that loss.
Now, you mentioned centre pivots before, and in fact our program that you're being part of has dealt very strongly with irrigation. How is it that centre pivots actually affect the bees? Does the water literally knock them out of the air?
It does. They can't swim, and or they get chilled if the water's coming through and getting cold. So that what's happening is they're down on the ground, they're getting chilled, they're not being able to fly back to the hive. So it's very, very important that when people are spraying, when they're applying these pesticides, when they're irrigating, that they think about the bees, communicate with their beekeepers, and perhaps do these things pre-dawn or at dusk when the bees are actually not out foraging.
Right. Well, that's a pretty simple solution, I'd have thought.
Absolutely.
But
everyone gets to win.
How are you getting on getting your message across to farmers and to the agricultural industry in general? Say, for instance, on the whole question of these coated seeds coated with pesticides and centre pivots, etc.
I think there needs to be more research into the long-term effects of these coated seeds and pesticides, the whole family of those neonicotinoids, which had seemingly miraculous, wonderful advantages when they came, but the long-term effects, the build-up, the residual is happening there. Now we're seeing lots of results, and certainly our international speaker that's been out this week, Gilles Ratia from France, who is president of the International Federation of Beekeepers, has been gathering this data throughout the world, and it's very, very obvious to us that there's global build-up of all these residues. So we would like to see IRMA to actually withdraw these things while more research is actually going into the long-term effects.
Now, just finally and very briefly, you talk about bee-friendly planting and diversity. What do you mean by that?
We've been working on a project over the last 2 or 3 years with Landcare. We rolled out a Trees for Bees format, and we have since done an urban Trees for Bees for the more controlled gardens. Obviously the rural ones was very hardy plants that could go out there into the countryside and basically be forgotten about. Now in the more controlled gardens, for transit, for the councils, for the urban dwellers, we've also got a recommended planting guide. So if people go through to the Trees for Bees New Zealand.org site, there's a whole lot of recommendations, and we're putting down 400-500 plants that are good pollen and nectar sources throughout the year, so that we're building strong, healthy bees as best as we can. And that's one very positive thing that each and every one of us can do to help.
Nice note to end on. Maureen, thanks very much for taking time out from your very busy conference this week and joining us.
Thank you.
Maureen Maxwell there. That's our show for this week, and a reminder, next week Drew Chapel will investigate an example of water management that has everyone singing its praises, the Opuha Dam in South Canterbury, which irrigates thousands of hectares of farmland and generates electricity for much of the surrounding district. And before I go, remember, you can catch up with the program on our website. Catch you next time.